I must say that I feel somewhat humbled and honoured to be here. For myself, I've travelled to a lot of fascinating places around the world with their rich cultures, but I feel that Abu Dhabi is the city of the future. It's positively amazing to me. I grew up reading comics, as I'm sure did we all, and they would often have science fiction stories, and they would show a cityscape in the background. I just feel I'm here in a science fiction world. It's quite amazing. And I think there's maybe a responsibility, I don't know if that is the right word, but it would be wonderful if Abu Dhabi, as a city of the future, could maybe just show the future some wonderful ways of education through entertainment. Now, I have spent, as has been announced, the last 40 years trying to educate and entertain at the same time. I really believe that children love the visuals of comics. They may not be able to read them, but they want to. They're not being faced with grey type, which has no attraction whatsoever. They're seeing pictures. And as the great American David Mamet once said, a good story should not need words. He was describing television and theatre, but the movement alone should tell a story. So if you add words to this story, somebody has already grasped whether they enjoy it, and they want to know what those words are. So I respect greatly what Qais is doing here. I think it's quite innovative and amazingly brave, if I may say so. Because had he produced Gold Ring in English, I'm sure his sales would have been far higher. Had he stayed in IT, I'm sure his career would have been far safer. However, he has decided he wishes to produce comics in Arabic for the kids of today. And I want to give him a round of applause for that. I don't know if you would care to join me.
Thank you very much.
So, without wishing to ignore Charles, if I may, I would like to ask Qais a few questions. Why?
That's a three-letter question that takes a lot more than 3 letters to answer. The reason behind that is I kind of had a questioning of where I was in life and what I'd like to do. And along with that came a realization that what I really want to do is to kind of leave an impression, have an impact. I wanted to do that in a fun way, because I'm a firm believer that once you're enjoying what you're doing, then that's when you really give the most, and whatever you give is the most effective. So I looked inwards and tried to establish what it is that I really like. And this fascination with not only comics and graphic novels, but with all things Japanese started bubbling up. And I tried to put that in a kind of structure that will also extend benefit to others. So that to me was a nice winning formula where I enjoy benefiting others. And that led me to this idea of, I think there was a kind of a gap in reading material. As I see it, the very early reading material for Arab children is seeing quite a bit of movement. There are some very high quality works, and if you look at the other extreme, content for adults is also pretty well developed, but in the middle there's almost an abandonment. It's almost like we're not carrying children across all stages of development. It's almost like saying, okay, here's your content at the very early stage. I hope you still like reading when you get to this stage. And so my bringing manga into this is my attempt to kind of introduce this stepping stone in hopes that others will follow suit, because we need a snowball effect to kick in, basically.
What kind of outreach are you getting from other readers? Oops, is this on? What kind of outreach are you getting from other readers?
Well, it's very reassuring that I am starting to see people tell me things that I was, expecting, but maybe down the line. But it's already happened. A lot of people are telling me that, I'll have like a parent contact me and say, "I've never seen my child read anything, willingly, before Gold Ring," and so that for me is very reassuring, especially given the fact that it is only currently available in Arabic. There is this assumption that the English content is good and the Arabic content is bad, to put it very simply. And I want to counter that, and I want to really set an example that cannot be a fault of the language. Arabic is a very rich language, but it's probably what we do with that language and how we present it that will make the difference. And so I'm very relieved to see that there is a lot of positive feedback coming from the readers.
Good. Charles, if I may turn to you now. You had a rather, I don't know if it was a surprise success, but you've had a huge international hit, I believe, equally out here, with Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Yeah. Could you maybe talk about that for a moment?
Sure. I don't know if people are familiar. Anybody familiar with the book Diary of a Wimpy Kid? Have people heard of it? Most people. It's a book for kids, mostly for 8 to 12-year-olds, and it was a surprise hit in the United States because we liked it in-house. It was a book that we liked, but there was no audience for it. It was sort of something that we found really funny, and I think it's a testament to the fact that if you put something good out, people will find it. Kids will find it. What we found was that the kids who went to school with 29 other kids in that class, and then they had 7 other classes after that, and it was just like ad infinitum that kids kept telling each other. And within a month and a half of this book coming out, it was with an unknown author. All the reasons I was told that I couldn't sign it up was the character wasn't likable, nobody knew who the writer was, the drawings were very simplistic, he doesn't learn a lesson at the end. Those are all the things I liked about it that my committee was telling me were the reasons to not do it. But the kids found it, and within a month and a half of that coming out, we hit the top of the New York Times bestseller list. That was in 2007, and we haven't left since then. And we're currently like #1 in Brazil, in Israel, and Germany. And it's just this huge international hit, and I think it just speaks to readers looking for material. It's really no different than what you're doing. I think there's kids, especially young readers, are desperate for material that they can relate to, and it's not so much the classics that we want them to read. It's stuff that they feel that they can own and stuff that they can understand. And it's really gratifying because after they finish a book like this, they want to read more. I mean, that's the highest praise that all of us. And we were talking at lunch today about how when somebody finishes your book and they feel like they stayed up all night and they finished your book, it's this huge accomplishment, and it feels very somehow that this kid who didn't read before all of a sudden has sort of gone over this big hurdle, this sort of life-changing hurdle, and then they want more to read. And I think that's really the most amazing part about Wimpy Kid, is that it started this industry of people who are trying to do more books like that, these sort of novels with pictures, combination of words and pictures. But it's a hybrid of comics. And then, what you're doing I find really remarkable, because I think it's to be the first is really hard. And it's easy afterwards for people to say, to imitate it, and that's always the sincerest form of flattery. But then all of a sudden you see what you sort of carved out for yourself.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear that, because I think it touches upon one of the most important things, in that as long as the content needs to be subscribed to by the reader. Mm-hmm. It's something that the child has to say, this is what I choose. This is what I would like to read. And in order to do that, there has to be a very solid understanding for what it is exactly that they want. And I think there have been shortcomings, unfortunately, in the Middle East in addressing books specifically written for children. There's a lot of writing down to the child, thinking that, wrongfully assuming that the child needs to be spoon-fed every single detail, and that, because he or she is a child, they can't possibly read between the lines, and we have to be very, very accurate and complete in describing everything, which is very unfortunate because I find them infinitely more capable than that. Mm-hmm. And even the way you structure language has to speak to their intellect. It has to basically reflect something that is very real, especially with graphic novels where all you're left with is dialogue. Mm. And so if the dialogue feels like something you would never say in real life, then that immediately puts up a barrier between the reader and the content. And I think it's very important to keep these considerations in mind and really write something that the child can really believe and subscribe to.
Yeah, I think kids see the adult behind something, and you don't want that. You want it to feel natural, and you want it to feel like the material speaks to them directly, as opposed to being filtered through an adult.
Definitely.
I think there's also a point that people often pigeonhole comics. They will say comics are a genre. They're not. They're a medium. Mm-hmm. Just as television, film are equally mediums. You can tell anything on the comics page, and in fact, you can tell more often than you can in film and TV, because the only restriction you have is the artist's imagination. If the artist can draw it, it's there. Sometimes for TV and films, if the budget isn't there, cross it out. You've found this, I think, haven't you, though, that even though you went to Japan for an artist, perhaps you would explain, though, that isn't as unusual as it sounds.
Well, I mean, I definitely agree with your point in it being a medium, not a genre, because, for example, manga has been successful in even academic surroundings, where we have some textbooks with content depicted graphically in manga format that have been very widely accepted and well regarded. There are also historical accounts that have been basically recounted in this manga format. And so I do agree that it's definitely a multi-purpose medium, that it just depends on how we use it. Now, I personally kind of use it in two ways. The first and foremost and the most important way is to entertain. And I sometimes get questioned on this, and people ask me, like, well, since you have this initiative, why don't you use it for good? Why don't you instill some positive values? Or why don't you use it to teach something or to reinforce something? And that's the second thing I'm actually doing. But the important thing to realize is it's very important to put entertainment just a little bit above any sort of benefit or a positive value instilling that you might want to do, because we are dealing with a young audience who does not want to read a graphic novel for the benefit that they might get out of it. They do want to read to be entertained. And so if you miss that step, then no matter how lofty the goals are, no matter how valuable the lessons are, they will not reach the audience. And so for me, anyone that reads Goldring and doesn't feel that they've benefited in any way, that's perfect achievement for me, because I've achieved the entertainment value, and I'm a firm believer that content will kind of, especially this attempt at instilling values and making a positive change, the most effective form of doing that is very subconscious. Mm-hmm. It's no use to get up on the soapbox, because that's not what children want to hear. They don't want to hear very direct, blunt lessons in life. They just want to enjoy what they're reading.
Yes. In fact, talking about various forms of manga, something that did come up over lunch was in Britain, we've had a line of titles come out, started about 2 years ago, called The Manga Shakespeare. And I was amazed to hear that you'd both heard of these, that they've been successful overseas too.
Yeah, well, not only did I hear of it, we publish it in the United States. We bought it in from a UK publisher, and it's been incredibly successful for us because less so in the comic book shops, in the regular comic book shops, but to the librarians. What we're finding, and what I think you find now, is that the gatekeepers, the librarians, the stereotype of a librarian who look down upon comic books is over. I think that generation is gone, and the generation of librarians is now people like us who grew up reading comics and wants to share it. And anything that gets people to read, whether it be comic books or anything, is welcoming. So I think that we've found that with the Manga Shakespeare books, it's been incredibly successful getting librarians and teachers to adopt it in classes and get kids involved in reading.
In fact, haven't you had a similar success with libraries yourself?
Yes, I've actually talked to a few librarians, and their reaction is always that their students sometimes don't read anything other than the manga titles that they have in the library. And for me, I've distributed copies of Gold Ring to quite a few universities in the UAE. For me, the important thing is to undo a negative association with books. A lot of people have this, books. We have to read these. It feels very heavy for them, and it's a very unfortunate thing that maybe a lot of the Western audience might not be able to relate to as easily. But it's definitely the case in the Middle East that easier forms of entertainment are preferred. Video games, TV series, movies, the kind of content that you can consume without much effort is preferred. It's faster, it's much more immediate, sort of like the instant gratification element of it probably appeals more than having to sit down with a book. Now, for someone with that kind of an assumption, which I obviously disagree with, I think books are infinitely more entertaining than any of the aforementioned forms of entertainment. It's very difficult to convince people of that. I mean, you could be the greatest, most charismatic talker, but it will need a actually positive experience to start undoing that. It's not something you can tell someone to do. It's kind of like trying to teach someone how to swim just by theory. You have to get into that pool and start swimming before you really understand how it works. And so the idea of using manga is to try to remove the main obstacle, which is the time it takes to read a book. And by being graphic in nature, it doesn't fall onto any sort of descriptive narrative. So you're not describing any sort of mindset or mood or surroundings. That you have the surroundings illustrated and you have the characters, and all that's left with is dialogue, and dialogue is quick. And so if you look at the page, the word count on any given page, it's very minimal, which results in a much quicker turning of pages. And my hope beyond hope is that eventually, having read a manga, they're like, that wasn't bad. That was actually good. And I'd like to read the next one. And I'm hoping that slowly, with time, someone might, from within, really start to wonder, like, maybe books aren't as bad as we think. And I think if we start at a very early age with that, then we can instill this love of reading in a effective way.
I think there's an interesting point there that in saying a manga is a speed read, any cynics in our audience, and I'm sure we do not have any, would surely say, well, that makes it sound like a cartoon, as in a moving cartoon, anime, as the Japanese call them. then why buy the print form when you could watch the screen version? And were anybody to think that, and I'm sure you wouldn't, my argument, personally, would be print is interactive, screen is not. There's a theory that I must admit I agree with, that when you are reading a comic, and you do need to be comics literate to an extent, you do have to accept that there's this strange, bizarre concept that the words are in a different plane to the visual. I would compare it, in fact, with watching a subtitle film. You're focused on the words, but almost subliminally. You're taking in the visuals. Try and do it the other way around, and you won't be able to keep up with words. So, comics, you need to be comics literate to read them. Children seem to have this ability. But adults, if they've not grown up reading comics, I've heard of countless adults who say, oh, I'm comics illiterate. There's a radio program in the UK on Radio 4 where every now and then they will, the book program, where every now and then they will review a graphic novel. And I've heard of a panel of 4, as many as 2 people say, I couldn't read it, I'm not comics literate. Now, can you imagine if that was a ballet review? 2 of the people saying, I couldn't understand it, I don't like ballet. They would not have been allowed on the program. So there are these built-in prejudices, unfortunately. But they really should be wiped out, because saying again about why print is interactive. Comics are interactive quite simply because if you've mastered the required literacy, it isn't the pictures you're looking at, it's what's happening in between. That is the interaction. So you are seeing, if you wish, still frames, like an animatic from a film, just the basic storytelling in pictures, hopefully all moving left to right. There are certain rules you must not break. But to link them together requires your imagination, to imagine that ball which was being kicked in the first picture that has now gone to the back of the net in the second one, that in between those 2 pictures, it flew through the air. You're linking these pictures together. You're putting something in. You're giving voice to the characters. A voice that often, when it's adapted to film, will let you down because you think, oh, the Incredible Hulk doesn't sound like that. Because for the last 15 years, you've had the Incredible Hulk in your head. Just as another aspect in this unabashed promotion of comics as education through entertainment, I seriously believe, as I'm sure we all do or we wouldn't be here today, that they're a great learning tool. Have you employed them as a learning tool in any capacity, Charles, putting you on the spot?
No, I have. And I think that when people, there's that literacy question that comes up a lot. And I think that people find that if they're not used to reading comics, they're not sure what to read first, the words or the pictures. And I think, if you start with, something basic like Peanuts and you're reading it in newspaper strips, when you're a kid, when you're younger, even as a younger adult, you don't really pay attention to, are you looking at Charlie Brown, or are you looking at what it says? Somehow you just intuitively sort of know how to read it, and I think that kids are more open to that than adults are. But I find that the problem with most comics is that they're built on this 10, 20, 30-year-old history of continuity. And I think if you get away from the continuity and just have these standalone stories, good comics are accessible if they're done right. And I think that most people, when they say they don't like comics, is they don't like bad comics, because who likes bad comics? Who likes bad books or bad movies or whatever? But if it's told right, when Will Eisner did a book called The Contract with God, which is the first graphic novel. It came out in 1978, and it was a personal story that he was telling. It was about the loss of his child. And he was telling it, he decided to tell it in comics for a reason, because he wanted this story that was what he felt was universal to be communicated in a universal way. And, that's a book that is self-contained. You don't need a deep understanding of what happened for 32 issues prior to it, or, how he got his powers or any of that stuff. You can make it understood. And then, later on, Art Spiegelman does something like Mouse, which wins the Pulitzer Prize. And slowly these things are evolving, and ultimately, you have the gold ring. I think there's just a long path, and everybody's sort of learning and building upon it. And I think that comics, when they're done right, when they're really personal, when they're about something, I think are easily, accessible. So.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, comparing the graphic novel, the printed form, to a visual form like a movie or an anime, the animated counterpart, there is another distinction that's very important in my mind, and that's familiarizing yourself with the written word, actually seeing the words. It used to be a concern that we don't, in the Middle East, hear classical Arabic for children as much as we should. Often it was in the local dialect of wherever you'd be in the Middle East. That has changed. We do have a lot of programming for children in classical Arabic, kind of an accessible version of classical Arabic that's very child-friendly. But my concern is even beyond that. If all their exposure to classical Arabic is through, a word that they hear, then there's not that necessary association with how to write the word, what the word looks like. And I think it might be a kind of a small thing, but I think it has very strong ramifications on what it could potentially lead to. And another thing is the pace in which you consume any printed material is determined by the reader. It's not, unless you have your thumb on the pause button and pause it every now and then to digest, you can kind of slow down certain paces. You can retrace a step or two and look at the written content to see whether you got that part right or not. You can zoom past parts that kind of invite you to do so. There are some kind of action sequences that really would not be the same if you do take them too slow. So the reader is definitely interacting with the content, and that he or she can slow down or speed up or interact in different ways with the content that is not possible with something that's at a predetermined pace.
There was a point also that came up at lunchtime. I don't know whether Qais was being polite and Charles wasn't in the room when it was stated, but you did agree with me at the time. And that was that comics is, to an extent, because I believe that to be singular, is to an extent the visual version of football. Because with football, it isn't the most popular game internationally by accident. It's the most popular by simplicity. To play football, all you need is just to put a couple of jerseys down at either side, a couple of jackets, a couple of paper bags, tin cans, and have a ball, and you can play. You don't need to map it all out. You don't need any hoops. You don't need anything complex. It's a very simple game to play. Comics are equally simple and pure. Unlike animation, film, songs, any other form of the entertainment media, if you have an idea, you can write it down, you can draw it. I was drawing comics when I was 6 years old. Nobody wanted to look at them, but that doesn't really matter. The point is, I felt I could do it. And I don't think there's any child who doesn't have that creative urge, that desire to express their thoughts and to express them visually. It's a wonderful gift we all have in us. Sadly, many of us grow out of it, and we think, oh no, I'm going to go off and work in IT. I can't do this. But I believe we all have this ability, and some of us will find it will be nurtured, and we will become professional writers and artists. Now, you may think, that isn't a real career. That's get a proper job time. Well, that's not true. A friend of mine, he produces albums, which is what the Europeans have been calling graphic novels for about the last 40 years. A simpler term, but obviously not used in the States because that's what you call your music albums. He's been producing albums for a long time, and strangely enough, his major market, despite being an Englishman, is Holland. And he's so respected for his work that he was knighted in Holland. He was made a Knight of Orange. I'm amazed by that because it wouldn't have happened in Britain, but he did deserve it. In France, Le Bon Dessiné is considered the 9th art. It isn't for children, it is, but it's for adults too. It's a medium. You can have comics for children, you can have albums or graphic novels for adults, you can have magazines which feature comics as well. It doesn't have to be looked at as this strange little thing in the corner. Just as newspaper strips have in the past proven often more popular than the articles that they surround, you can integrate them. I'm sorry if I keep saying how wonderful comics are, but a lot of people still don't seem to believe it. I do.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening to you, and thank you very much for an interesting. I didn't think comics were so interesting, but thank you for making it so interesting.
One convert.
To echo what Philip Kennedy was saying earlier, we grew up with Tintin and Asterix and all of this. I have a three-pronged comment question. Maybe you could look into trying to answer it. The first one is, and you touched upon it just now, which was about the importance of the graphic novel in the French community and the success there, and the fact that, with the exception of maybe Tintin and Asterix, that hasn't translated into other series that are quite popular in France. Why might that be the case? It also leads me to a question about adult illiteracy. And could we not find a way for graphic novels to be used in a positive, to overcome the stigma of it being related only to children, so that we can use it as a format to help with adult illiteracy, not only in the Arab world, but throughout the world?
Indeed.
And my third question is a comment, if you know anything about a graphic artist called Joe Sacco.
Sure.
And I, as an adult, have attempted to read these graphic novels. He does a graphic novel series about, very graphic novel series about Palestine, about Bosnia, and about different places. And I have not been able to finish a single one of those books. Maybe you could comment on that as a thing.
It would be rude to comment on possibly why you haven't finished reading it, Mr. Kanu, but I don't know. Maybe there is possibly the thought that these are initially serialized. And then, okay, that one's out of the window. Charles.
Wow, that was great. You punted that one. All right, we'll take the last question first. I think the Joe Sacco thing, I've read his books. I like his books, but I think that he's of a camp that I try to avoid in the books that I edit and the books that I read, which is that he requires a foundation and a knowledge that's not as inviting as somebody else. I think that if you started with somebody like Will Eisner, who is really pure in his storytelling and makes no assumptions of the reader, that you know exactly how to read it, how to approach it. You should never in a book not know if you read what caption you read next. Yeah. And I think that Joe Sacco, and this is no slight to him because I think he's very talented, assumes that the reader knows the visual language of comics. And I think that it's a missed opportunity. If I were editing that book, I would probably, with tracing paper, reposition the word balloons. I would sort of edit the dialogue down. I would sort of, have that sort of, proxy reader that I try to do, with a book like Wimpy Kid. I mean, that book started, when we first did it, it was 1,400 pages, believe it or not, of material that he had, and we whittled it down to 224. And it's always about taking out what's not necessary. And I think that in that particular book that you're talking about, there's just too much. So I think I think it's just a choice. I would say that, the fact that you're here means you're predisposed to it, and I think there are lots of other books that would make it easier. Mouse by Art Spiegelman, Fun Home by Alison Bechtel, Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. There are lots and lots of great graphic novels where you never have to worry about, why am I reading this,
I think it's fair to say also that Joe Sacco works for a company which is a very hands-off company. They don't actually employ editors with a capital E. They will have production people to move paper from one pile to another, but they believe in, I was saying earlier, the purity of the form and laissez-faire. So you do find there are people who, what can we call them, rough diamonds, so they definitely have a sparkle, but they need an editor to polish them. And Joe Sacco's publisher, I think it's fair to say without wanting to sound too diplomatic, does have a very hands-off approach when maybe the end product could be better were it to do exactly what you did with Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Yeah, I think any writer, I would hope, and not just because this is what I do for a living as an editor, but I think any writer or artist would see the benefit of having somebody, my job as an editor is not about me, it's about making sure that the artist or the writer says what he or she wants to say as clearly and succinctly as possible. And that's a collaboration, and that's, I don't go around in the books and talk about like, oh, that's my ending, or I rewrote that, or whatever. It's like I'm invisible to that part of it. So a good writer, and I found that, the best writers, the most accomplished writers, really welcome that, and they want that feedback, what's working, what's not working. And then a lot of writers, somebody like Joe Sacco, and they get to a point in their career where, they've done 5 or 10 of these and feel like they're doing it, it's their work, and they don't have any feedback. And I think everybody needs feedback. I think, I'm not saying that, it's good in the case of Hollywood, but even Hollywood, they have test screenings, and, are people laughing in the right places? Are people getting it? Are they walking out of the theater? I think you just need somebody that you trust to give you that feedback.
Okay, so did you have something?
I'd like to say something about the second question about the using it to target adult readers. But before that, just listening to this, I think it's worth noting that the Saccos, Satrapis of the world have a very different type of graphic novel. And that's something that I think is very important, and it goes into the education that goes along with graphic novels. And it's not always educating the reader. It's sometimes educating the parent, educating people who are not graphic novel savvy. The danger with working with the assumption that, graphic novels are for kids, is that you could be exposing a child to content that is very clearly not child-friendly. And it can be very deceiving. You'd think that maybe just by the graphics, just by the look of the scenery and the style of illustration, that you would be able to spot it. But I've personally, with a manga title called Narutaru, not to be confused with Naruto. Narutaru starts off very kind of childish, and with my interest, I was like, "Ooh, this looks nice," but very quickly it turns, and very suddenly it turns very dark, and you have very young, early teens contemplating and attempting suicide, and it does send that chill down your spine. And I think it's very important to educate people that graphic novels are not a single, one little category. The for kids stamp needs to be confiscated. And we need to really look at content as it comes across us and categorize them accordingly. But about the experience of what we can do for adult readers, Japan has had a very successful experience with getting an older generation who can read but chooses not to get back into the habit of reading. I don't have the title on me, but it was a series of manga graphic novels, not illustrated much like Goldring, but illustrated in a way that would appeal to an older generation. and the content was primarily about Japanese folklore. So it was things that an adult audience could definitely relate to, and that immediately opened them up to, well, this is a nice, easy read about something we actually, agree with and care about. And so that opened up the door towards more reading in an elder audience.
There's a question to Qais. You said earlier that a child who reads the graphic novel can do it at her own speed, and figure out the words. And if somebody, a child isn't very good at reading yet, at the end of a novel maybe has figured out all the words that occur many, many times, and next time in another piece, this word immediately strikes the eye and the child may be able to sound it and exactly knows what it means and has mastered these words in there.
Yes.
Now, my question, would you advise someone who wants to learn Arabic to use the gold ring to master Arabic?
Well, master might be a strong word, but I do firmly believe in using whatever content is best suited for you. It might be graphic novels if you're into that. And that's why on a recent trip to Japan, I tried unsuccessfully because it was smack dab in the middle of the holidays and they were closed. But the intention was to deliver some copies to an institute that was teaching Arabic to Japanese nationals. The Japanese are probably the single most accustomed people to manga format, being born out of the land of the rising sun. And it just made sense to me that if they are presented with content that they are probably reading already in their native Japanese, but in a language that they're trying to learn, then that might make a lot of sense. And I have had a few people contact me saying that they're trying to learn Arabic and they found the book entertaining and a nice kind of learning tool. I just wish it was that essential guide to mastering a language, but it cannot be that. It just can be a comfortable choice, a nice alternative. Rather than reading something heavy, it might be nice as a quick read. And you learn things as you go along. I mean, incidentally, the font probably doesn't show too well, but the font I used is called Masira Ballpoint. And it's a Lebanese typographer who actually put the typeface together based on graffiti. Mm-hmm. So I fell in love with it when I saw it, and I commissioned the bold version of it as well. So I liked it that much. But I got comment from a friend of mine who said his son loves the book, but he's having difficulty reading because the letters don't look anything like the letters that he's used to. And so it really got me thinking about, for the future, I think I have to keep in mind that there are, it's kind of wide-ranging. I've had the youngest person I know of who successfully read the book is 9 years old, and I've had people in their 50s who've never read manga in their life kind of screen the book before they pass it on to a child or a grandchild, and also enjoyed it and expressed that interest. And so even in these little details, it should be you should be careful with using it as a very direct choice to learn or develop language skills. There are certain elements that have to be taken into consideration. But I have had quite a few very positive experiences with that.
It's our pleasure to have you in here. I have a question for three of you. Be ready. How can comic art be a part of changing the world to a better place from today?
Yes.
Very good.
Thank
That was
you.
not a planted question, by the way. Excellent question, if I may say so.
I'm glad you didn't read the Qais Sedki at the end, though.
Charles, would you like to...
Yeah, I was thrown because the name of my imprint is called ComicArts. So thank you. I think that I think it's what we're talking about here. It's about making this medium accessible to people and showing them something that they sort of heretofore dismissed as not something they liked or not something that they got or was for kids or, I think, when the people in my life that I've given a comic book to, that I've edited, or even one that I haven't edited that I recommended that I really like, it's an amazing feeling when they read something and they realize like how much they can enjoy a comic. And it's sort of like this whole thing. It's like, there's a generation now who probably would never think to watch a silent movie, but if you showed them a good Chaplin film or a good Keaton film, they would love it. It's not part of it doesn't play on television, it doesn't play on Saturday morning the way it did when we were growing up. There's 30 or 40 more years of different kinds of movies in between. But I think that, when it's good, when you give it to somebody and they discover it, then they want to see more and more. So I think the good that comes out of it is just, telling personal stories that make a difference and changing people's lives with really a medium that they sort of before had dismissed. So.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that question really makes me feel a bit philosophical, to be honest. So, who are we? Who is anyone, really? What makes us who we are? We have to look at our inputs. We have to look at what it is that we used as entertainment. What did we grow up with? And what kind of an effect did that have on us? I really love to sort of like project forward and God willing, if the plan goes well, I kind of have this image of, maybe in 20 years or so, kids who were like 12 maybe today, 32 there, my math is intact, they might be sitting and saying, you know what, we were there. We were there when it all started for this whole like generation of Arabic manga or Arabic graphic novels or, comics in the Middle East. It really shaped us, I mean, for myself, growing up, watching a lot of, I still get like a shiver whenever I remember Grandizer and the stuff that we grew up with as kids. It really, manga to me is very, very inspirational. I mean, there are certain series that I've read and certain events that I remember very clearly that have literally had me go, no, did that really happen? I mean, I'm that moved by it. And so I think this is an excellent platform to effectively change people. And I think when I look around, I see a lot of youth who are unfortunately, wandering aimlessly. If we're honest with ourselves, we have to admit this. You stop them, don't even ask about goals, ask about a hobby, and they're like, it's this not having something to hold on to that's very dangerous. And I think, with manga, it's possible. We could possibly raise a generation that doesn't feel ashamed of thinking that, this is a positive value and I'm proud of it. There's nothing wrong with that. You get to show by example. You get a chance to show lessons and teach them in a very effective way. It's much better than going the very direct, blunt way. I mean, how many times have we been told very clearly, do this because this is good, and totally ignored it? It's only when you really learn a lesson and you are convinced from the inside that this is right that you start to see effective change. And I really hope that, not only can I continue this, but I really am praying that more people will be convinced that this is not just a really fun thing to be doing, but also worthwhile. So, end of philosophy.
The worst thing about being last, of course, is all the best answers have already gone.
But the best thing is you can lay claim to them, right? You can say that. That's exactly what you wanted to say.
So having had both, I'm now going to have to resort to my third answer, which is that I think to make the world a better place, well, that's the penthouse, that's the top. So first you need the foundation. You cannot build without a solid foundation. Why am I out here talking about building and foundations when I know nothing about such? Because, metaphorically speaking, that foundation surely must be literacy. If you cannot read, you cannot understand. If you can understand, you're starting to move up that building towards the ultimate goal of peace on earth. So I think, how can comics help, was, I believe, the question. Comics can help by doing something against this worldwide problem of ever-increasing illiteracy, not necessarily just in children. The accessible face of literacy has surely got to be the combination of words and pictures. So, what I would love to see is for publishers to forget about high cover prices, for distributors to forget about big cuts, and for retailers to forget about big cuts, and for comics as an educational tool for entertainment, promoting literacy through graphic art. These are all little sound bites if anybody wants to use them later. Let's get them out there. Libraries are great, but a little stuffy. Who goes into libraries? We need to find maybe a vehicle, a way to get this product out so people will look at it and want to read it. If we can achieve that, I think we're getting there. But we do have the perfect way to increase literacy if we can only reach our audience. And I think that would make a fascinating discussion all by itself. Thank you.
I have one more example about that, because I published a book called Mom's Cancer, which was a book by Brian Fees, and it was about his mother's battle with cancer. And to me, I could sell, millions and millions of copies of Wimpy Kid. We didn't sell millions of copies of Mom's Cancer, but the copies that we did sell really helped a lot of people. And it's one of those comics, unlike the Joe Sacco that this gentleman was referring to, where we had a mission there, which was to how do you this is a horrible thing that happens. It's one of the worst combinations of words, Mom's Cancer. It's like I couldn't think of anything worse. I remember my publisher wanting me to change the title to something more inviting, and I thought, what are you going to call it? Like Mom's Bad Day? It's what it is. I think it's just that combination, that honesty was what was so inviting. And that book has helped so many people. It's helped doctors communicate to patients and realize that there are other ways, that the way they communicate is important. And we've gotten letters from doctors, we got letters from children who lost their parents, from husbands whose wives succumbed to illness. And it doesn't even have to be about cancer. It's about dealing with a family dealing with illness. Is as universal, unfortunately, as life can get. And I think that, again, it's the personal stories that really matter. And I think that, the letters that we get and continue to get, or the ones that we got, it's really, it can make a big difference if you tell the right stories.
My question goes to Qais. I don't want to sound rude, but the question is, what makes the Gold Ring different from a translated manga comic book? Because what I see now, I don't know the story, I didn't read the book, but what I see now could be like why didn't you use a character that looks more like you or people you see around you over here? Because most of the successful comic books I've read talk more about or portray people that look like the author.
Yes.
And stories from their lives, like Mom's Cancer or Chris Ware. I don't know. I love Chris Ware's books, and like Marjan Satrapi, Persepolis.
Yes.
What makes Arabic manga successful? I don't see it going further. It's like cafe latte with camel milk.
Yeah. if the intention was to be rude, you have to try harder, because that was not rude at all. So don't worry about that. I'm very happy that you did bring this up. There were a few things there that I'd like to touch upon. First of all was the issue of what makes it, special in any way. Why not just translate instead of doing something like this? I think it's very important to have original homegrown content, because in the absence of that, we really are sending a very damaging, indirect message, and that's basically telling our kids that we've let them down. That if you want something cool, something fun, something that you can read that's ours, oh, well, I'm sorry, we don't have that. If you'd like that, it has to be North American. It has to be British. It has to be Belgian. It has to be French. But it cannot be Arabic, because we don't have anything that good. And I think that, even though nobody will very bluntly say that, at least I hope not, but that is often, the unspoken message is often the one that the child hears the loudest. And it's almost like they're looking around and say, look, all these kids have their forms of entertainment, while we don't. And I know you're probably sitting there and saying, well, that's Japanese, that's not Arabic. And I would agree with you, but only partially. The protagonist, Sultan, does have the Japanese features. The big eyes, the spiky hair, not the real Japanese, the Japanese manga features, let's say. And so, but I was at kind of a crossroads. I was either to go, full Japanese style as far as characters go, and therefore, attract a lot of the audience that I know for a fact grew up watching Japanese animation and are very comfortable with it. See, I always have this thing in the back of my mind that I'm trying to make it appealing, and so I need all the help I can get to make it more appealing to them. And so, if I go full Japanese style, they might be like, "Oh, cool! We know what this is. Let's go that way."
They didn't realize sorry to interrupt, but they didn't realize it was Japanese, did they? When they were reading it as children, when you were saying about the Japanese work, it was taken to be Arabic exactly. Drawings.
The original animated.
Main point.
The original animated works. As kids, we assumed they were ours. We had like Captain Majid, which is, it's Captain Tsubasa in Japanese. But we changed the name to Captain Majid, which is a very Arabic name, and it's about football. And so we were like, oh, wow, this is an Arabic character. And then you see the signage that's clearly not in Arabic, and you start to slowly realize that, hey, it's only dubbed very well, but it's not really ours. The alternative to going full Japanese for the characters was to go full Arab style. And even though it would be very kind of, very close to being homegrown content, my concern was it might not click well with a very young audience that the slightest thing could very easily put them off. It might be like, nah, we like the Japanese stuff. And so, even though it doesn't show on the cover, if you do get a copy of Gold Ring, you will see that the path I went through was the middle path that wasn't there. I kind of, made my own path down the middle. And I have a mix of both characters. I have characters in traditional, Emirati garb, and I have others in costumes with a Middle Eastern kind of flavor. So I'm hoping that kind of brings it in a kind of a hybrid that's acceptable to both the audience and also tends to my concern with being homegrown. The visuals, yes, sometimes are very Japanese, but the content itself, it's not some Japanese artist sitting somewhere trying to imagine what it's like in the Middle East. It's a Middle Eastern author writing and doing the character development and incorporating all sorts of cultural elements into it. And at the end of every volume, there's a very direct educational spread. In Volume 1, for example, it talks about falconers' tools. Volume 2, sneak peek, is going to be about types of falcons that are common here. So there isn't a very direct educational spread right at the end. There are elements that do make it different. So I hope that was, if I missed something, please let me know.
I'm a librarian, so I've appreciated the shout-outs to libraries. And and I do agree that libraries have been, I think, instrumental in promoting comics and graphic novels and making them more accessible to a broader audience, and perhaps I would argue legitimizing it to a broader audience as well. But I think it's almost a symbiotic relationship, because graphic novels and comics have made libraries more accessible and cooler, I would say.
Excellent.
So
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're with you on that one.
From the perspective of collection development, there's always the issue or potential issue of censorship. And that's always sort of in the back of one's mind, because you need to be a reader of graphic novels to be able to build a graphic novel collection. And I'm proud to say I am a reader of graphic novels. But does that potential issue of censorship enter into your perspective as a writer and as an editor?
Wow, okay.
Was that directed to anyone in particular?
Oh, all of us.
You start.
Well,
Qais.
for me, we also had this discussion as whether we needed to go through the proper channels, you clear the censors and stuff like that. And I joked about this probably being the easiest thing for the censors to do, because I personally choose to self-censor. So I think there's very little treading on toes with Gold Ring, for the reason that my intention with this manga specifically is not to, take a stance on something very controversial. What I'm trying to do is to, reach an audience that, in my opinion, is pretty distant from books. And I want to do that in a nice, simple, easy, accessible way. So I go down that route. I think for comics in this part of the Middle East, because it is very different. I mean, you have like Taxi in Egypt, and you have some works that the censors have had quite an issue with. As I see it, in the Gulf region, probably the issue of censorship might come in at a later stage, when the genre or the medium is much more, let's say, varied. I mean, currently there are not too many titles that fall into the Middle Eastern graphic novel, at least this type of Middle Eastern graphic novel. So I think it might be an issue at a later stage, but currently I think it's probably easy to tap into this kind of shonen manga, so manga done for young boys, basically.
Yeah, I think self-censorship is the key thing, because, as an editor, I feel like I have a mission, which is to make comics accessible to an audience. And, I don't need to use it as an opportunity to push buttons or to do, I do that in other parts of my life, but I don't need to do it at work. And, I'm given this responsibility, and I try to always be as clear and concise in the books that I edit, and make sure that the message is really clear. And stuff like that just sort of gets in the way. I think it's very clear if, you're dealing with something that has some sexual content in it or whatever, how it's presented. And, I think it's very clear from the context usually. But, if you're going to pick up something, you shouldn't all of a sudden be surprised that there's, something in there. So, I think a lot of it I think it is self-censorship. You're just trying to make sure that it doesn't offend, but it's not being politically correct. It's just being, I think, sensitive more than anything.
If I may throw the question back at you, I'd be fascinated to know. You say you're a librarian, so graphic novels, which in my own country can encompass Christmas Carol and Jane Eyre, as much as Judge Dredd and humour. Would you position all of those graphic novels in the same place because they're in pictures,
I really appreciate the question because when I was a public librarian, I was a youth services librarian. I'm an academic librarian now. But I was building the first graphic novel collection when I was a public librarian for young adults. And we had comics or graphic novels in other areas. And I was very careful about, no, I can't just pull them all together because of the medium. I mean, you have to have some in the adult section and young adult and then children's. But that's where you need to be a reader yourself, so you're not surprised when you go through something and then whoops, there may be something really insensitive. So, but I think that librarians especially, we have tried to educate ourselves on this so that we know how to put them into the different places so that they're in the appropriate areas. So it's.
So how do you deal with general fiction?
With what?
With general fiction. Forget that this is a graphic novel. How do you deal with a novel? Surely the same problem must occur. Is this going to be an all-age? We don't generally have certification on books, I know, although this is something.
The labeling is an issue. The labeling is an issue. And it's one that, especially in the States, that we've spent a lot of time on because of the visual aspect. Like a lot of people think it's, like you said, it's for kids. And so when you have something that's so easily accessible as graphic visuals, it's, you know, you need to be careful and you do apply the same collection development principles to it. But I think we have tried to educate ourselves on that and apply the same kind of principles to this medium.
So is that the problem, in fact, this time, that it is too accessible, while we've been talking about how wonderfully accessible the medium is? Perhaps when you get to the more adult themes, just by the fact that they're in pictures makes them too accessible and should be up on that top shelf.
Well, I don't like anything being on that top shelf.
Really?
But yeah, it's just being sensitive to the population and also perhaps anticipating the issues that might be there because parents or teachers might come with these issues and librarians especially are at the forefront of protecting accessibility. So it's a thin line of providing things to be accessible, but also understanding the population that wants them to be accessible.
I'm always wary of the slippery slope, though, because I think where do you end? I mean, you know, if you have a cookbook, you know, do you have to put a sticker on it if you're, you know, in case it's good, it has meat recipes that might offend vegetarians. It's like, where do you draw the line? I think it's, you know, it's again, you know, if they're put together right and you sort of trust the publisher, you trust the creators, there should be a good sense of what you're getting.
Do you not have websites which will provide the database so that as a central source you can find out when you're about to order some books, ooh, this has got violence in, this has got, you know, the usual restrictions that are placed for categories?
It's a general question to the panel. Yeah, how do you think the digital migration of everything media related that we see around us today impacts or will be impacting the traditional medium of comics?
Okay, could we make it clear everybody's going to be late home today? The final question, how do we feel about the digital
the final question's a panel unto itself, I think.
Yes, isn't it?
I think we're in the early days. I think, you know, it's really hard to say where it's going to end up and how it's going to change. What I would say, just, you know, the reality of digital is that it's affecting the book business in a significant way. I don't think in the same way that the music industry was affected, because music was always something that was meant to be heard. So whether you played it on an album or or you downloaded it illegally on an MP3, you were meant to hold it. I think you were meant to hear it. I think that books are, by and large, something that you want to hold in your hand. What's happening more and more, though, is that obviously with devices like the Kindle or the iPad, people have that accessibility to read it. What I would say is just support local bookstores and you know, comic book stores or bookstores, and not just Amazon, because I think libraries. Excuse me, thank you. Because I think that slowly what you're finding is that you know Borders in the States. There's a chain called Borders, which is about 10% of the business. They've stopped selling books effectively at the beginning of the year. Barnes & Noble, which was the other big chain, just laid off 55 of their key buyers. And Amazon, which takes a huge discount is asking for a steeper discount. And it's making it really harder for companies to produce material. It's one thing to, I'm not saying to cry for us, but it's more about the creators who need to get a certain amount of money up front so that they can create the book. So I think it's going to change, but we're really in the early days, and I don't know where it's headed, truthfully. If I did, I would be very smart.
I hope I have some time to address that. I'm really glad you did bring that up, because it brings us, in my opinion, back to this whole idea of in the Middle East, part of the title of today's panel. I think technology can definitely play a very positive role, because oftentimes whenever we hear books and technology, we're thinking about e-books, but that's just one way. I mean, the whole disintermediation of the supply chain, technology has a big role to do with that. We now have things like books on demand, print on demand, where you no longer need to print a massive amount of books and risk having them sit there and take a big loss with that. You can now digitize the content, and a print run of one is all of a sudden not only possible, but you now have this new game-changing environment where you can actually have every book printed. I mean, theoretically, every book printed could possibly be sold. Pre-sold before being printed. And so there are different elements of that. And I mentioned that it is very valid in the Middle East, at least conceptually, because we have issues of distribution here. I was mentioning, with the numbers that Wimpy Kid has sold. I mean, our best sellers sell in 3,000 or 4,000, and that's unless it's cookbooks, which is a true fact. I mean, cookbooks really do sell, but beyond that, we don't sell a lot of books. The numbers don't compare, and what you can have with digitized content is all of a sudden you're doing something that we want to do easily. And that's widening the audience. It's one digital product that can be made accessible to a much wider range without having to worry about logistics and how to get the copies to them. And it's even more convenient in many cases. And although I was a skeptic, I mean, I was an early adopter of the Kindle, went on an insane shopping spree, started reading one book but never finished it. But I also am very wary that's my generation. My 8-year-old and my 4-year-old are probably not going to be of the same mindset. I mean, they were born into this Kindle, Nook, iPad. There are so many devices now that it might be the standard for them. It sounds scary. I know there are librarians here, and I personally will always favor a book. I need the dog ear or something. But I think for the upcoming generations, it might be different. And I think technology can definitely play a very positive role in that.
I think so. I think the only question, there's no doubt that it will, is how do you make it into a business? How do you, printing on demand is one thing, but being able to pay an author or an artist or make a living printing on demand when it's been traditionally a business, that's what's yet to be seen. Because, once you take out that bookseller, once you take out that ability, it makes it harder and harder.
Yep.
Maybe there is a solution to that. One aspect we haven't looked at on this whole digital situation is, though touched on by you just then, is actually the creative's standpoint. We've been looking at it very much from the standpoint of the publisher and how is it going to impact on our sales. Well, let's turn all of this around, because our sales would be zero without the creatives, without the artist and the writer. Now, how do they manage to get to us in the first place? They have to stand in line at a convention. They have to mail their portfolio in, not exactly cheap to do, and hope it will be returned, or make very expensive copies, because often we are talking teenagers, foundation art and design, or whatever. Isn't the internet wonderful? They can put their portfolio online and merely send a link. I know professional artists, well-paid artists, who are maybe just fed up of drawing the same old company-owned characters day in, day out, knowing that when they get to the age of 65, they will still be drawing those company characters day in, day out if they want any money. No royalties. You draw X-Men, no royalties.
And
you
no
get
health
paid.
benefits.
Pardon?
And no health benefits.
And no health benefits. So, big answer to a small question. Now I know artists who put their passion online. They may be drawing X-Men in the daytime, but they really wanted to do a romance novel, a graphic novel. So they will put a page a day online. And sure enough, by the end of the year, there's an entire graphic novel online, and a publisher can sample it. Unlike having to commission somebody with a huge upfront and hoping they will deliver the goods A, on time, and B, those goods will be worth looking at. The internet allows publishers to be able to pick and choose as a takeaway menu. So I think the internet is an add-on to publishing. We still want the tactile feel of a book. But if we, all of us, as readers, as publishers, as creatives, if we can sample online, we know whether it's worth spending our money on the real thing, because you don't want to have a download. You want it on your bookshelf. You're proud of it. You want to come back and read it again. So I adore the internet. I think it's a fantastic promotional tool for print. Thank you.